Dr. Pamela Heath, welcome to the Edge broadcast.
Well, thank you for having me, and may I wish you a happy 2022.
Indeed, it will. And I've already declared that 2022 is going to be an amazing year for everyone.
It can't be much worse than the last one, so I think most people will just be thrilled at the idea.
Yeah, well, hey, that's right. And we're gonna give us some tips tonight. But Doctor Heath, man, Handbook to the Afterlife, and you've got so many various productions that you have. In fact, if people want to go to your website, I put a link there, and you've got resources there, and you've got some PDF files and some slideshows. Pretty interesting, and it's really well done. Your website is really well done. I've seen
Well, thank
thousands.
you. I am my own webmaster, so I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
So I mean, you get
And I
right to the
have
point.
no advertising.
No.
It's meant to be a resource because there's so much misinformation on the internet
Hmm.
that I used to go to a lot of ghost hunter meetings back in the pre-COVID era, and I would hear the same questions over and over again, and it kind of drove me nuts because I would hear other speakers say, "Well, we don't know that," and I'm thinking, "Yes, we do. We have some very good knowledge about many of the things people were asking." And I'm like, and clearly it wasn't getting out there.
Hmm.
So I did put together the website and the videos and the audio stuff and the PDFs and
Hmm.
slideshows,
Hmm.
all that stuff as a way to try and give people a, a source of free information that
Hmm.
they could learn from the parapsychology angle of things from someone who actually knew the research.
Hmm. Well, like I say, an excellent job on that. Well done. So let's just ask a simple question. Just very easy. Is there life after death?
I believe so, yes. And it's a lot harder to navigate if you don't believe in an afterlife before you die than if you do. I'll tell you that one, because it's kind of hard for the spirit guides to get you moved on if you don't have some kind of framework. It doesn't necessarily matter what your religious framework is. If they have something they can work with that they can help you understand what's going on, you're a lot better off.
Hmm.
I think the spirits I've seen throughout my life that were in the most trouble were usually skeptics
Hmm.
who did not believe in an afterlife, and then they felt alive even though they were dead, and they just could not figure out what was going on, and they had no training, no background, no way of understanding what was happening to them.
Mm. Now, I've heard that that ghosts are really souls that should have went to the light, but they didn't know they're dead, and they're kind of hanging around. What's your take on that?
Well, there can be lots of different things going on. That's what sort of makes it interesting whenever you do a haunting investigation, is because it's almost never a single thing. It's usually a mix of different things all meshed together and misunderstood and confused. So you can have, for example, place memory, which is not an active spirit. You can still be alive. You don't even have to be dead to
Hmm.
have people see place memory that you recorded of yourself.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because I've run into that before, where I ran into a guy who didn't believe in ghosts, but he did believe in place memory because he had actually been seen by a living person and he was still alive. He was telling me this story, and they saw him like he was a ghost, but he had just been in a very emotional time, and he had
Hmm.
probably used mind matter interaction to record the environment, and then people saw it and they thought it was a ghost. It wasn't. It was him. Place memory. You can see, I think, sometimes they are spirits without consciousness, sometimes they are spirits with consciousness, and there may be some things going on like time slips that people misunderstand and think it's a ghost, and you have two different time periods seeing each other at the same physical time.
Hmm.
There's
So do you believe in
lots of things.
do you believe in the multiverse theory?
um, I do, actually.
So is it possible that, and I don't know if this connects to the multiverse theory, some part of it would be, but are we living lives somewhere else right now?
There are versions of ourselves. I kind of think of it like, if you were to ever see how a bee has a vision of the world. Have you ever seen an image of a bee's eyes and how they see?
Yeah, I'm a
It's like
beekeeper
lots
actually.
of little, hexagons.
Hmm.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So they're seeing different versions all over,
Okay.
slightly different.
Okay. Okay. I can see that. They have, yeah.
That's sort of the way I view the
Okay.
multiverse.
Okay. So yeah, they're
Oh,
and see now there you go. Because now I'm thinking, let's say for instance, when it comes to uh, transvestites, I figure, well, okay, well, there's male and female, but maybe in a multiverse they got confused and they've come to this side. They say we're a woman over there, but now they're a man over here, and they have this residual desire to be what they were. How about that?
well, it can be that. It can be other things too, though. I mean, if you've had a lot of past lives, and I do believe in past lives, if you've had a lot of them in one gender, it could be hard to switch over.
Mm-hmm.
And it could also be that they had done a blueprint where part of what they wanted to learn was um, to live life from a different viewpoint. So
Mm-hmm.
to live it as a transvestite. So I believe there's all kinds of different possibilities going on. And it's the same as like with parapsychology. You're going to get people upset because they think it's one thing or another, and it's not. It's multiple things that can be happening.
Okay, well, hey, we got a number of questions coming in. Here's one from the avatar name of Cardinal Sin. It says, "Do we have hands in the afterlife?"
If you think you do, I
Mhm.
mean, what's interesting about conscious spirits, which we'll call, you know, ghosts with awareness, like people traditionally think of ghosts, that they can see you, they're aware of the living, they can react. They appear the same way they think of themselves. So if they think of themselves and they don't think about shoes, they won't have shoes. If they think of themselves and they're extremely depressed, they may be a gray blob and have no hands and just sort of be this featureless, formless thing. So basically, and you can actually see someone who died when they were 100 as a 5-year-old little girl or little boy. So it's how do they think of themselves in that moment is how they see themselves and how you may see them. You can't necessarily be too literal.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and we have this from Put Yahweh First. And I don't know if you've looked at the website, but we had a couple polls up there and related to tonight's topic, or actually to the guest, which is you. One of them, of course, is ESP. So,
Yeah.
and I'm going to give you the results of that. Of course, the answers
Yeah.
are not at all. Yes, I have it. What is it? I have intuition. The results right now is 61 or 63% of people say they have intuition. 26% say they have ESP, and then another 10% say they have nothing at all. But at least the fourth one's not mentioned or not checked because it says, what is it? So evidently everybody knows what it is. And so this question is relevant to that poll. And from Put Yahweh First says, can you move objects with your mind?
Can I personally?
Well, it
Yeah,
just said use. I don't know.
I've done mind matter interaction. I find it interesting how often people have had experiences that they don't recognize what happened. And I ran into this when I was doing my dissertation because I was interviewing people about the experiences they'd had. So I could try and tease apart what were the key aspects of the lived experience and what was sort of irrelevant chaff you should ignore, it's distraction. And sort of boring down on common ground. And when I was interviewing people, a lot of times they said, well, I can do this, but I can't do that. You know, or I've had ESP, but I've never had mind matter interaction, or the other way around.
Mhm.
And the more you start talking to them and asking about their experiences, they started to realize, no, they'd had a lot more experiences than they'd realized. You know, it's like, and sometimes it's how you ask the question. For example, if you ask most people, if you walk into a room where there was just a fight, you know, you missed the fight, but you walk in, there was just a fight. How many people, and there might not even be any people in the room anymore. How many people can sort of feel that in the room? And most people will say, yes, I can.
Mhm. Mhm.
So they're picking up on something. Um, how you label it and how well you can recognize it when it's sort of slapping you in the face depends in part on your culture. And you sometimes see it with gender that it's sort of more accepted in one gender than another, which depends on the culture you grow up in.
Mhm.
So you talk to, for example, cultures that are very open to the afterlife and to seeing dead ones return,
Mhm.
and like you may get 100% of widows and widowers will get a visit within a week after the death.
Mhm.
But if you talk to a culture where there's it's not considered as accepted, then you don't know if their denial has made them oblivious to it or it just didn't happen. But there's a strong cultural component to how much people are going to say yes to that.
Mhm. All right. Smoke C from the live chat says, Doctor, is it really death when we die, or is it just a transition from one realm to another?
I think it's the latter. I would agree with them.
Hmm.
One of the things I liked about Handbook to the Afterlife, which was my third book, I think, is that when John and I were sort of kicking around what to do with that book, whether to even write it, because there are so many books about the afterlife, and we realized every book we'd seen about the afterlife only talks about it as a place, and they talk about, oh, well, you're going to have pearly gates or you're not, you know.
Hmm.
And there's tremendous cultural variation between what people see. And we realized that, in point of fact, it is exactly like life in the sense that if you study psychology, you'll learn there's different stages of life. And it depends on whether you look at Erickson or Maslow or who as to how they name those, Piaget for the child
Hmm.
stages. But every stage of the human lived experience,
Hmm.
you're going through a developmental phase.
Hmm.
And there are things you're supposed to learn and master, and then that sort of moves you to the next phase.
Hmm.
We realize the afterlife is the exact same. It's
Hmm.
a continuation of a process that started during life. And there's different phases with different things you have to learn, different ways you can get stuck and messed up, and then what happens next and how you progress farther.
Hmm.
And so what Handbook to the Afterlife talked about was those different stages. And it is from a definite perspective that it's the same as life in the sense that you've got things to learn.
Mm. Well, I do have some news for my Christian friends there. There are no pearly gates mentioned in the Bible, nor is there little fat naked babies called cherubims, and St. Pete's not going to meet you at the gate. There's no recording of that anywhere in the Bible, but those are myths that sort of come up. That doesn't disclaim what's in the Bible, but there are things that come
Yeah.
alongside it that I think we need to address here, just face to face. All right, here's a question from our moderator, Jade, who's running both our chats in our YouTube streaming channel and both on our
Uh-huh.
website. It says, Doctor, what's the difference between ESP and tuition?
I think I think it's just a matter of semantics. I think ESP is how some people think. Let me reword this. Intuition is a far more accepted type of ESP that most people can accept. So I found throughout my medical career
Okay.
that people get very bound up in language. And if I was getting a psychic hit about something, depending on who I was talking to, they would be more apt to accept it if I used the right terminology. So, like with this surgeon, you talk about gut feelings. Surgeons like guts, it's part of the body. You talk about a gut feeling, they're more apt to listen to what you have to say. In the general culture, intuition is a word that is very well accepted.
Mhm.
Now, what you have to remember with intuition is it's not going to be pure ESP. It's going to be all psychic information comes through the unconscious mind.
Mhm.
Okay, so the less you've worked on your own personal baggage, the more accurate ESP is going to be contaminated by information from your unconscious. So you might have a deathly fear of something like, oh,
Mhm.
that bridge. It might not have anything to do with
Mhm.
what you're getting ESP wise. It could be what's coming from your unconscious
Mhm.
mind, your unconscious fears.
So uh, in the original Matrix, the little boy there was able to bend a spoon with his mind. Now that's telekinesis, isn't it?
Yeah, we call it temporary metal softening. Yes.
So do these things work hand in hand, telekinesis, so to speak, and ESP?
A lot of people think they're the same thing. This one I did years ago.
Wow,
A
you did
lot of
that.
fun. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
When you're What's interesting about ESP and PK, or what's now known as mind matter interaction,
Mhm.
just because it's a more accurate term, is that the more you study them, the more you start to realize they may be the same thing by two different words.
Mm.
So that's why a lot of parapsychologists will talk about psi, the word PSI,
Mhm.
because because we aren't really sure whether we're talking about something where we're affecting the universe, or we're getting information, or if it's this sort of mix where you're getting constant feedback intuitively, um, at the same time as you're acting
Mm.
on the world around you, so to speak.
Okay.
Um,
Mhm.
with metal softening, what you do is you focus on putting energy into something, and generally you're just sort of tapping it in the air, and you wait for it to just, and you suddenly feel a shift, like it's suddenly really, really, really soft, and it's just like a spaghetti noodle, and you just do whatever. The more interesting one I ever saw was someone who tied a pencil in a knot right in front of a friend of mine, a wood pencil, ordinary number two wood pencil, tied it in a
Mm.
knot.
Mhm. S-
And
So is
that
it
I haven't been able to do.
all right? But is it then that people have certain powers within our mind or our conscious that we don't know that we have?
We all have these abilities. When you look at the actual research, we got away from dealing with stars or people who had developed their talent greatly years ago because there was just too much fraud. There was too much, reason to cheat.
Mhm.
Oh, so we look at ordinary people, most of whom don't feel they have any abilities, and what we find is they have abilities. It might be a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, what I think most people don't realize about psi phenomenon is a lot of times it will only develop in your 30s. So I know for myself, I thought of it as something that you would have all your life or not at all. But
Mhm.
apparently, it's a sort of a need based thing. What you need in your life to survive that you can't get in ordinary ways, it may fill in that gap. So, like police officers who need it, the blue sense is what they'll
Mhm.
call it.
Mhm.
Firefighters will often have that extra intuition when the fire is going to change so they can avoid danger.
Oh.
Soldiers will talk about it. Um, it's a needs based thing.
Mhm.
And what's interesting about that is that if you have your needs change, your abilities may also change.
Mhm.
So there were things I could do when I was working as a physician, for example. I'd know what kind of emergency I was going to do at what time of the night. I mean, I'd know
Mhm.
like, oh, go to bed early. There's going to be a 2 o'clock in the morning OB-GYN case.
Mhm. Mhm.
Go to bed, 2 o'clock in the morning, get woken up for an OB-GYN case, that kind of thing. I can't do that now. It's not important to me. I don't take calls.
Mm.
So,
Well, I tell you what, Pamela, I looked at my bank account and I was seeing trying to add zeros to it
uh-huh.
and I couldn't do it. So, in fact, what happened was I got fined. All right, so we got a question for you from Rose Renault. Says Dr. Pamela says, "How can you tell if it's a real ghost or a demonic entity?"
Well, there's a couple ways,
Mm.
and we're talking about people who don't have a lot of experience dealing with spirits, you know, because I know for me, I will feel different levels of spirit, high or low, as different temperatures. So really high spirit, I'm freezing to death. It can be 90 degrees. I'm in my warmest parka, shivering to death. It could be a real low spirit, and I'll feel them as very warm and just ugh, don't want to be near them. But I think what you want to look at is if you are getting messages, or you feel you're getting messages from a spirit, are they helpful or are they unhelpful? If they are helping you to be a better person and to
Mhm.
live a better life
Mhm.
and to be happier and
Mhm.
to get along better with people, then it's probably a positive spirit. Okay.
Okay.
If it's saying negative things to you, no,
Mhm.
you don't want it. And you always have spirit guides.
Mhm.
You can always ask them to protect you. You can
Now,
visualize
is
yourself
it
surrounded by white light, that kind of stuff.
Dr. Pam, is it possible that our own conscious, our own thoughts we may be misinterpreting them as spirit guides?
Absolutely. It's really tricky, but it gets back to the bottom line. Is it helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Is it not?
Mm-hmm.
And then take things with a grain of salt. It's the same as people who remember their past lives. You can't get too literal. You have to sort of take a
Mm-hmm.
step back and say, okay, this may be coming from me. This may be coming from a better source. You
Mm-hmm.
know, if you don't have a lot of experience and you
Mm-hmm.
haven't worked on your own issues, your own baggage a
Mm-hmm.
great deal, it's going to be hard to tell. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's even hard to tell when you have worked on your own stuff. It's like, okay, this is going to be a tricky one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you can always go back to that touchstone. Is this really helpful?
Mm.
Is this not
Okay.
helpful?
Okay. And I do understand that. And but there's also and you mentioned past lives. There's also this scripture out there in the Bible in Hebrews. It says it's appointed unto men once to die. After that's the judgment. Now I happen to subscribe to that. I haven't because I haven't been convinced, and I haven't seen somebody who's been dead that came back. Am I just not seeing them correctly, or what's the situation there?
My understanding is that originally, the original Christian faith, at the time just after Christ passed, did believe in reincarnation. They believed in about three. I think it got kicked out of the scripture around 500 or 600 AD. But I would say the most interesting evidence for reincarnation, what sort of changed my mind about it, was a book called 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation by
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Ian Stevenson,
Mm-hmm.
who's a psychiatrist out of the University of Virginia. And what he looked at is he went to third world countries where people didn't have access to multimedia. They couldn't go to movies. They never saw TV. Most people had never traveled more than a few couple miles from their home. And if you can talk to children, usually between the ages of 3 and 5, these children could accurately describe entire past lives. They could identify people in their family. They could tell how they died. Sometimes they had birthmarks related to how they died. Sometimes they could speak an entire language they'd never been exposed to. So when you get all this information from children, like I say, it's usually between 3 and 5. And of course, it's hard in the US because they could just be pulling it from some TV show they watched.
Mm-hmm.
But in a third world country, it was like,
Mm-hmm.
these are interesting cases
Mm-hmm.
suggestive of reincarnation. And that's what
Yes,
kind of opened me
and
up.
I am aware. I'm aware of those, and I
Mm-hmm.
found them very intriguing,
Mm-hmm.
and that just kind of goes with my sort of belief world view that there's a heck of a lot more going on around us than we know, and I think that we can live more spiritual lives or more worthy lives, better lives. You mentioned try to live better if we are more attuned to that spiritual realm around us. You know, man, that goes around, come around is not just a thing. That kind of is a thing. And
Yeah.
you know, so you got that going on.
Yeah.
Anyway, bunches of questions coming in for you, Dr. Pam. Here's one. And you just addressed that one. So freely speaking out of the live chat. And by the way, if you're watching this program on a YouTube channel, the chat is on the right lower part. It will pop up. And if you're watching this show on our website, the chat is at the top on the left. They both pop out and they're both connected. All right. So freely speaking says, Doctor, does one have to die to be brought back to life in order to understand the afterlife?
No, there are a lot of people who've had what they call near-death experiences. Usually that means briefly dying. You know, it can be a second, a fraction of a second. It can be hours in some cases. Um, and there's a lot of books out there you can read on near-death experiences.
Mm-hmm.
They've been studied quite a bit. You still have the problem of it's going to have cultural bias to some extent. Different people are going to report different things depending on their expectations. It's sort of we even in life, some of us have rose-colored glasses. Some of us see everything as glass empty.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have the same thing with the afterlife. So they may have legit experiences, but it's going to be colored by their own psyche, their
Mm-hmm.
own personality,
Mm-hmm.
and their baggage.
So I've heard a lot of people, and I've said this many times, but I've had covered so many different topics since 2004 since I've been doing this, and that about people coming back from the dead, they always have a similar type of experience. They see a bright light. They may be greeted by somebody. These kinds of things. A lot of them say they floated up. And y'all know you've heard this. They float up above their body. So there are similar accounts of near death experiences that all through these years. So is it that they're all aware of the same story, or is this the way it is?
Now there's some cultural differences. Like I think in Japan they cross a bridge. They don't see the white light and float. They cross a bridge. So there's a certain amount of cultural variation in the near death experiences. There's also a variation between what I'd call positive and horrific near death experiences. So you'll have some people who will never want to talk about their near death experience because it was so horrible. And usually those are people who haven't worked on their psychological baggage. And I figure the afterlife is trying to sort of show them they really need to buckle down.
Well, doctor, I don't know if you know this, but we had a doctor on the show who, a medical doctor who worked in the emergency room, who saw people die, flatline, and come back, and so that intrigued him about near death experiences. So he interviewed over 1,000 near death experiences. We had him on the show, and he said a full 25% of them had what he called near hell experiences.
Yeah.
So now,
yeah,
I gotta say,
trying to say,
I gotta say,
they're not all great.
let me bring up a stage thing here for the folks here. Let me get I gotta move some things so they can see that clearly. I'll get out of the screen too as well. Okay, so that's all they're seeing right there is the first stage is recognizing death. Looks like, and this is from your website, and it's from some of those really easy to see things that you present. So separating from the body, meeting spirit helpers, and so you're showing sort of kind of moving through different stages, I guess. So how long does this take as you go down through what you say is what happens?
It just varies because it can be very, very fast. Those first 5 stages can go very fast if somebody understands that they've died and that they should be looking for helpers and move onward. I mean, it can be literally, well, time moves differently in the afterlife. So I hate to give a time estimate, but it can be very, very fast. The separating for the body is something that can be cultural to a certain extent. So if you look at some of the people who channeled this information back to us in the early 1900s, they thought that they were stuck with their body for 3 days. I think that's kind of a cultural thing. Different people would report different things. So what we tried to do is we were actually looking at like 500 books of channeled material, and we threw out the ones that were clearly bogus. Some people, it's just, they were channeling their own beliefs. They weren't channeling from the spirits. But we got from as many different cultures in many different eras, starting with the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Tibetan Book of the Dead, Islamic Book of the Dead,
they all kind of did.
Some of the great Christian prophets. So we started from that, but we also looked at recent stuff, and we tried to sort of separate out the stuff that seemed to be cultural or depending on a certain era rather than going through.
Well, it looks like, from what I can see, is that reading that is that I mean, I'm not perceiving you addressing that 25%, and I understand.
Oh, because that's a near-death experience. That's not.
Yeah.
That's not entering the afterlife fully. That's the near-death experience. People, it's usually. They may meet spirit helpers, go immediately through the levels, or be taken to a really low level where they have the horrible experience.
Well, there is another low level is in the book of Luke here. I've got the scripture up here. It says a rich man died and buried. Now that rich man encapsulates somebody who doesn't know Christ, is what that is. That's anybody who has lived a life without basically God in their life, that type of thing. And it says in hell he lifted up. So they immediately, because now you say what happens to people immediately after they die. This scripture here is I got a point here. It is wait a minute, I'm getting my wait a minute. That way. That way, right there. Got it. Okay, so this is addressing hell. This is addressing the 25% right here. And so now I didn't see that in yours, and you say they go to a low level. This sounds like a pretty low level right here. What do you think?
Yeah, it'd be near the earth plane. So from what I've seen, we often create our own hells, and sometimes there are joint hells.
Okay.
And
Mhm.
you know, when we talk about the different levels, I don't usually address the near-death experiencers because they aren't dead long enough
Mhm.
to go through a lot of it. And so I think for a few of them do talk about meeting spirit helpers and being brought
Mhm.
to where they're shown in, shown materials, shown information, and then they're brought back to their body.
Mm.
The people who've been through a hell type experience, I did not interview, most of them don't want to talk about it, because I had a friend who went through one, and she wouldn't talk about it, absolutely would not talk about it.
Mm. Yeah, I could understand.
Other than she was scared to death of dying, which
Well,
wasn't particularly helpful. But I suspect some of that is.
well, let me tell you a story about that. Doctor, let me
Okay.
tell you a story about the fear of dying. This is in
Okay.
secular history. You may know
Okay.
this already, but back in the Roman Colosseum days, when they persecuted the Christians, they would bring them out to Colosseum, and they would chain them to a pole, and then they bring out the lions. It sounds like a movie, but it's true. It's what they
No, it
did.
was real.
And of
Yeah.
course, they were persecuting the Christians. They tried to stamp that out, and because it was challenging, they perceived it was challenging the rule of the Caesar. So they want to make a spectacle out of them. Well, certain Christians, this is from secular history, and this is certain Christians, when they were near certain death and the lions were coming to get them, it is recorded, it said that some wore their chains as necklaces, as badges of honor, whereas others screamed in horror and pleaded that they would deny this Christ person they were all worried about. But the people that weren't fearful of death, it says literally that people in the Colosseum stands jumped out and went down to them and asked, what is this faith you have that you don't have this fear of dying? You are about ready to get mauled apart. They wanted whatever it was they had inside that would keep them from that kind of fear. So you talk about the fear of death, and I think sort of the false apostates, those who don't know Christ, kind of had that fearful thing. They didn't know where they're going, kind of like you just said about this person. They didn't know where they're going. So yeah, they're going to have this intrinsic fear. It's going to overwhelm them. So they can't even think about it. But you know what? It's appointed unto man wants to die. At some point, doctor, you and I both know that we're going to go to the great beyond and see what's over there.
Yep. And that's when we'll know the real truth. So be aware. I'm not arrogant about saying I know for a fact exactly what it is. I don't think any of us do until we're there.
In fact, somebody pointed out in a live chat, I'm watching it live, there was a song written for this. It was called "Don't Fear the Reaper."
Oh yeah, no, I know it well. Little Oyster Cult.
I'm learning that on my guitar too. It's a little tricky. All right, so here we go. Another
Good
question.
song.
Got more great questions in for you, Doctor. Can ghosts be the fallen angels or something called the Nephilim?
I don't think that's what ghosts are, is what I would say. I mean, most of the ghosts I've run into were either people or animals.
Now, how do we know, Doctor, how do we know that we're not dead? And this is all an illusion? How do we know that? I mean, I see you digitally. You may not even exist. I could be talking to another universe. How do I know?
Well, you could be talking. Yeah, actually, if you want to talk about electronic phenomenon, ITP, instrumental transcommunication, there was a whole area of research that was looking at the spirits in the afterlife being able to send radio or television signals back to the living, and they were able to capture stills of different people, and they gave information. Unfortunately, one of the big researchers in that did get caught in doing fraud. So it sort of discredited that area. It's the same with the animal side. Somebody got caught fudging data. So you end up throwing it all out. You don't know. There may have been some legit stuff. It's hard to say.
Yeah. Well, you know,
Um,
a couple of years ago, somebody got caught putting a, a a Bigfoot in a freezer, and it was just sewn together bear skin over some animal parts. And you know, we all thought we got the Bigfoot, man. And boy, did that ruin it for a lot of us out here that's looking for the big
yeah,
guy. We're out here looking for this big guy. Now somebody's got him in his freezer chest, and it's a fraud. So you know that puts a bad light on the whole thing, and
yeah.
it's a real downer for me. I just gotta say. So
Well, I think whenever you're approaching these phenomena, you have to take everything with a grain of salt. For example, what you'll run into is a lot of ghosts will lie about who they are
mm,
and what they are.
mm-hmm,
And they, they do it because they want attention. It's sort of like um, you have them walk in and you think, oh, maybe that's some famous actor. And you go, of course I am, and it's like, because they'll get more attention. It's the same with spirits. So um, I never get attached to who they say they are.
mm-hmm,
I mean, if it's somebody that if it's a family member or relative who comes back, sometimes it'll be something very specific that will make it clear that, yeah, this really is that person and not somebody pretending. But for the
mm-hmm.
most part, I don't care if they say they're Prince, whatever from the planet Beetlejuice. It doesn't matter to me. They're a spirit.
Well,
They're going to
I'm
either be
thinking
helpful or unhelpful. And
there's a famous quote in a movie called Doom, and
mhm,
The Rock is in it, and they're out there killing zombies, and he tells his guys, he says, this time when you kill them, make sure they stay dead,
yeah.
because they weren't staying dead, Pamela, and I don't got no use for the dead coming around and festering the living. I mean, the dead need to stay dead, or I'm going to kill them again. I'll just keep on doing that, some kind of Twilight Zone thing. All right, here you go. What is the purpose of somebody, or this is from absolutely nobody. What is the purpose of someone who is dying being visited by dead relatives? And I've had to have my family.
It's to help them reorient towards the afterlife. When you're dying, you're thinking about all you're losing. You've had your whole life on this. You're thinking about the friends you're losing. You're thinking about the loved ones you're losing, the job you're losing, the career, whatever. You're thinking about what you're losing.
Mm-hmm.
When you have greeters, especially family, and I've seen this too when my mom died, come visit, it changes the orientation from what you're losing to what you're gaining. So it makes it easier, that parting of life, parting from life, easier, because you're realizing it's not all loss, it's also gain.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's get to another one here. This is from Shaiwanakia. It says, Doctor, can traumatic events increase ESP or intuition?
Absolutely. Like I say, it's needs based. If you need something, if you need to have that ESP, if you need to have that mind matter interaction, there's no other normal way for you to easily get those needs met. You can do all kinds of amazing things. I mean, you hear stories of women lifting cars off babies
Yes.
when the car weighs more than they can physically lift.
Heard that. Mm-hmm.
And so it's an extreme emotion. There's no other way to get this. You desperately want it. You may well be able to do it. So yeah, we do see things like that. Whether you continue to do that is a little bit up to the unconscious mind. There were some studies done in the past where they used hypnosis to reactivate the ability to move objects or that kind of stuff. So it's something that the unconscious mind appears to be able to turn on and off.
Mm-hmm. And going on to, you mentioned we were talking about the going to the light. Again, there is biblically that's not in there. Going to the light. There are some things that just kind of because you talked about cultural influence. I mentioned the fat little cherub babies, and they're always naked. I'm always concerned with that, especially today. Okay, there's no such thing. The cherubs in the Bible have been these fearsome 13-foot dudes that had flaming swords, and there's no apple on the tree. It never said it was an apple. And then if you ask, 90% of Americans will say animals went into the ark 2 by 2. That's not the case. It was 2 by 2 some and 7 by 7 others. So there are cultural things, and one of those is this light thing. There's nothing ever recorded about going in the afterlife, going to light, but yet a lot of people have said that. Now, as far as talking to people who are dead, I'm going to show something here that's very personal to me. I'm just going to share myself a little bit here and get out of the way. So I went, and this is my mom. I cleaned her grave. I never knew her. She died when I was only 2. And so I went to clean her grave, but I talked to her while I was there. I didn't get a response, but I felt in my heart that she was happy that I was there. So I think sometimes, and then the people say you should never talk to the dead. Well, I think there are cases that has to be sort of put in perspective on that. There are times when it does come up, and it's perfectly fine, and you're not going to burn in hell like we showed that scripture earlier. Send those that won't cry. So there are times, and and I mentioned to you before as well that I know somebody with family members who another family member appeared to them on their deathbed. They were in hospice, and it was my oldest brother, and he said his second brother down visited him, and of course he wasn't there. So I don't know. It could be psychological. It could be real. Do you think it's a combination of both?
Would say, generally speaking, when I've talked to people who saw a visitor like that, they gave enough details that it sounded real to me. Could it be imagination? Sure, it could. They could be hallucinating, but I think most of the time, the people I've talked to, it just, how when you talk to somebody and they give you a story, you can sometimes tell, is this real? Did this really happen, or is this person spinning a yarn? Like a West Texan likes to spin yarns, okay?
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Because
they
I went
do.
to medical school in
Wait.
Texas, so I know about Texans.
Is it?
But most of the ones I've talked to who describe it, there's just something. It's sort of like the difference between a precognitive dream and a regular dream. There's a different feel to it. A precognitive dream that comes true in the next month or 3 months or whatever, usually it has more details. It has an odd vividness to it. There's just something about it that sets it apart from a regular dream. I think it's the same with these visitors. So if you're talking to them, a lot of times there's something about their story when you're listening to it that it just feels like this really happened. Although, you'll get other people who are clearly hallucinating, and especially if they've taken too many amphetamines and get a paranoid schizophrenia.
Wow.
But there's a different feel to it.
Okay, that brings me to let me see what we have here. There's a story. I don't know if this is this scripture. Let me see if I can see what this scripture says here. It says, their death in Hades gave up the dead, and they were judged according to their works. So we mentioned earlier, as I mentioned earlier, that there are people that when they die, they go to another place. Some people go and experience. Now you gave a PDF file or a file of what you believe happens, but then I've mentioned the other 25%, and this is one of them where they're judged according to work. But the story goes that there's somebody that's in this place called Hades or hell. Some people call it hell, Hades. I'm not sure what the difference is, but they're talking to somebody that's in another realm, and they're saying, I want to come up, tell my brothers, because they're on this earth plane and they don't believe in this afterlife. Talk about, they don't believe there is no such thing as afterlife, and we're talking about the handbook to the afterlife. So this would be appropriate conversation to have. But the other side says to him, well, we could send a prophet, we could send miracles. They're still not going to believe. They're dead set in their paradigm that there's no afterlife. And somebody's down in Hades saying, well, there is an afterlife. But this guy who's in Hades didn't know he was dead because he was talking or he was waiting. So the dead was able to speak from Hades to people in another realm. It's really amazing stuff when you talk about different realms and different dimensions that when you look at, say that was written 2,000 years ago, but put it in today's context, it could have been another dimension he was talking to.
Could be, but there's also, it's interesting how often the dead are not aware of other dead that are around them.
Hmm.
So they sort of almost are in different bubbles in an odd way. Sometimes they're deliberately kept that way. If you know, the one thing I think that you would agree with is the afterlife is based on love.
Hmm.
Okay, that's how the source, God,
Hmm.
operates,
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
on love.
Okay.
And so if you have people who know nothing but hate,
Ooh.
you don't want them contaminating a world that operates on love. So you might sort of buffer them, almost like a sound buffer, energy buffer,
Hmm.
to keep that hate from bleeding out to everyone else. So so in some cases, the spirit guides apparently do separate people and buffer them. Like you talk about the suicide bombers, that they
Hmm.
get, buffered
Hmm.
from the other population. And you get some people who sort of self-buffer. They'll, you know, they have these self-creating prophecies. Do you remember the old Robin Williams movie? Uh, what was it? What Worlds May Come, or something like that, about someone who'd committed suicide and they were stuck in this sort of hell
Hmm.
scape. And he was trying to break through to them, find a way to help them move forward.
Hmm.
And so, to a certain extent, that does seem to be accurate in the sense that people will create their own hells,
Okay.
or their own worlds, or they may create a very, you'll see scientists who want to live in little communities. That's why we didn't focus on what it looks like, because you're going to get 1,000 different answers for what it looks like. Um, but what you do see that stays the same, regardless of how it looks, is that there are stages that they're working through. One of them that appeared in every single culture from the dawn of time that we could find was judgment. Judgment happens in every version of this, but usually there's an emphasis of self-judgment, but there's also those who make sure that you don't let yourself off too lightly
All
or
right.
too harshly.
Ooh. Okay. All right. We have this question here. It says, "Do you believe in a life review?" This is from Smoke C out of the
Yeah,
live chat. Do you
yeah,
believe in a
that's
life
what we were just
review
talking
when we
about.
transition over? How does that work in your opinion, doctor?
Oh, a lot of times. Oh, you're talking about where you see the light flash before your eyes.
Well, it says, "Do you believe in a life review when we transition over?" So it sounds to me like you're already gone. You're on the other side. Now you're getting a life review.
Well, it can occur in two different ways.
Okay.
As you die, some people will have their life flash before their eyes. It's not uncommon to hear that. But that's not that's not the later stage. The later stage would be on that next slide you didn't show, reviewing and judging the life. And it's something that can take a long time, especially depending on how long a life you've lived and how many things you need to consider or reconsider or learn from.
Okay.
And that reviewing and judging your life um, can take a very long time. Generally, it takes a fair time no matter what, because you're looking at every experience you had in life, and what could you
Well,
glean from that? How could you have done it differently? What
how
might have been better or not?
how long do you think that'll take?
Depends on, they
Life
talk
review.
about,
Is
you
it?
talk about someone who was a really horrible person, it could be 1,000 years.
Oh,
If you
nope.
talk about the average person, it seems to be months to years. Um, the other thing to sort of emphasize, we broke this up into different stages. And I emphasize some of the stages, like visiting the living, can be optional, but you're not
Okay.
necessarily stuck in one phase nonstop. So, for example, you spend a little time recovering. Say you had a long, debilitating illness, you need to get your energy back. Maybe you visit your funeral just to see loved ones there one more time. Um, you go back, you do a little more recovery work because that exhausted you. Then maybe you do some of the reviewing and judging of your own life, and then you're like, that exhausts you, so you go back and recover, and then you're going to do some reviewing of the life, but you want to actually be there, so you visit the places where you were alive.
Hmm.
um, Not because you're a ghost, not because you're stuck, but because the spirit guides are with you, helping you sort of relive that experience enough that you can learn more from it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like you're just always going to one step to next to next to next. You can be going back and forth several times.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But reviewing the life is going to be a long one because it's very important. That's how you learn. When
Okay.
you talk to spirits who have been nonstop stuck as ghosts versus spirits who have gone to the light, learned from it, become better people, and come back, they're very different.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to emphasize this sometimes, especially with the living who can't forgive somebody who was abusive.
Well, let's talk about that. How big of an effect is unforgiveness in this life? What is it? How does that affect you in the next life?
It's hard. You're talking psychological baggage.
Does it slow? Does it slow your progression? Does it send you to a lower, as you say, a lower realm? Or
I'd say both. Forgiveness is important. Forgiveness is important. It's, if you cannot forgive,
okay,
if you can't forgive others, you can't forgive yourself either. They're connected.
right? I could see that.
Okay.
Okay.
So then any transgression you've done, you can't forgive yourself. You can't forgive others. It's going to be very hard to move forward. You've got to learn that forgiveness. And from what I see, the first step towards learning that forgiveness is perhaps remembering gratitude.
Well, okay. Hey, by the way, those just joining the live chat, Cardinal Sin, welcome to the program. Hound Jog, welcome. Pony Red Rose 2000 and GF07. We're talking to Dr. Pamela Heath about Handbook to the Afterlife. She's giving her views and perspectives. We do have a link to her website. If you go down and look around, it's very easy to maneuver website there. You might take a look there and see what you might learn from that. All right, let's get to another question for you, Doctor. It says, this is from Teflon Coat, do you ever work with near-death patients? And have you developed any new talents or psychic abilities?
I developed my abilities in my 30s, and it was quite a shock because I was one of the many who thought that you were either born psychic or you weren't.
Okay.
And I probably had, looking back on it, a few things when I was a little kid that were sort of hints that I had this ability, but I didn't recognize it. And it was useful. What I found is, and it wasn't just people who had I didn't have anyone who had a near-death experience for me on the table as an anesthesiologist. Probably partly because they were just too deep under to remember. Mm-hmm. You're going to get into, we're talking about this, states of consciousness. And what's interesting is what you learn in one state of consciousness, you can't always remember in another state of consciousness.
Okay.
So you might learn it under the anesthetic state, but it's so deep that unless you were under anesthesia again, you wouldn't remember it. It's the same reason they tell students, if you do all your studying while you're using marijuana, you better use marijuana for the test because you're going to be in an altered state. You need to be able to remember. You need to be in the same state you learn the material in. Or people, a lot of people get their information during dreaming. People are more psychic as they're falling off asleep, as they're dreaming, as they're waking up. It's a more psychic, they're more psychic states. You're more apt to get psychic information then. So you keep a notepad by the paper and you jot it down before you're fully awake. Because as soon as you're awake, you'll forget what it was.
Yeah. I've never been able to capture my dreams. I mean, automatically. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I wake up and I can remember, but in most cases I can't.
Yeah, you have to be really fast sometimes, or the other way is sort of, if there's a vivid image, you can try and rehearse in your mind and remember. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you can pull the dream back using that vivid image.
Now, I have mentioned various biblical scriptures, and dreams and dream interpretation is in there. And it says that the other side will speak to you in those dreams. Now, you mentioned earlier, and let me bring this up here, and I'll get off of here. You brought this up about suicide here a couple times. and what happens. And as you probably recall, I mentioned to you as we were getting ready for this show that I had a brother who who took this route, I guess you could say. And let me go ahead and bring it up. That's him right there,
Yeah.
Thomas. That's my brother, and he committed suicide. He was on psychotropic drugs. They tried, for one reason or
Oh,
another, he got off of them, and then he committed suicide. Now you have that book there, and and I'm sure if anybody in the live chat, if you've had somebody in your family or you know someone who's committed suicide, just say yes, a simple yes. You have in the live chat. It's a very somber kind of point of the show right here, especially for me. So, doctor, what do you have to say about what happens to people that commit suicide?
we looked at three different types of suicide because we were kind of curious, are the experiences different? So we looked at traditional suicide. We looked at assisted suicide when you had, end of life, you were dying, you know. And we looked at suicide bombers or suicide murder. And what I think surprised me most was that both the suicides and the suicide murderers um, felt very othered. They felt they didn't have other options. Um, they had a lot of regrets. They had a lot of trouble moving forward. I do believe that they're all eventually forgiven and that they all do eventually move forward, but it can be very hard. What was interesting to me was that with assisted suicide, um, we didn't see the regrets like that. There were one or two who said, I had actually written that suffering into my blueprint, my plan, and this was what I was supposed to get out of it. And I kind of cut that short. I kind of regret that a little bit. But most of them didn't have regrets. The other types of suicides did. And I think the other thing is how devastating it is for the family and everyone left behind. Because there's all these woulda, shoulda, coulda. Why didn't I see the signs? Why couldn't I have stopped it? What if I had done something different? It's just devastating for the
Mhm.
family. There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of grief. And
So is
the spirits on the other side can feel that. They're still connected to you. They can feel that. So a lot of them
mhm,
had regrets about the pain they caused
mhm.
those
So
they left behind.
but I've heard that people say that people who commit suicide uh, are they may be trapped in some netherworld because they have an unfinished business and see this is a quandary too because as I mentioned I think we showed a scripture earlier. Let me see if I can bring that back up where it says here like I get it back in the screen here and I got to get myself back in there and then I'm going to pull this back up here. Where is this here? Look here. Okay, so it's appointed. Well, that's not it. Appointed once unto man to die. Where is that one there? This one here. There it is. Okay, so does in your view, and I know you're not claiming to be a biblical scholar, but
No.
people who commit suicide change this appointment?
I, from what I can see, they do often end up in a bad place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but part of the problem isn't that God is unable to forgive them, but that they're unable to forgive themselves. And it takes a long time sometimes for them to get past that,
Mm-hmm.
to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe eventually, with the help of guides, that they learn to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to vary. It can be a very, very slow progress compared to somebody who dies of natural causes
Mm-hmm.
and has different regrets or fewer regrets sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It varies.
Mm-hmm. Now
But
I've
that's just
heard
my
now.
belief is that all are forgiven and all eventually move on
Yeah.
and get past the life review and are allowed to do spiritual work. One of the things we saw is a number of the people who channeled material for the suicide book
Mm-hmm.
claimed to have committed suicide themselves and become guides who specialized in greeting those who had taken their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
And they were trying to help, I would say, discourage that, to
Mm-hmm.
let people know what they were getting into if they took that route. Um, and that was part of their spiritual work for moving forward.
Yeah. There is several people in the live chat that have said yes to the question, do they know somebody in their family or close to them that's committed suicide? Certainly there's numbers of them that's showing up in here. And it's and of course somebody mentioned that, of course, psychotropic drugs do make you suicidal. But then there's also
There's some
just recently
points
today
as
I
well.
read something about a large number of military are also committing suicide.
Yeah,
That also has to go with a sort of a depression too as well. People don't seem to have any hope. All hope is
right.
lost. I mean, hope.
They feel out of
When
choices in life.
Jesse Jackson saying, "Keep hope alive, keep hope alive." Well, there, I thought he was crazy, but that kind of makes some sense. We've got to have hope. In fact, I don't know if you ever know anything about this show. We have a segment called the Bear Report, and it precedes the interview between 8 and 8:30, and the bear calls in and it gives us good news for the week. Good people doing great things for other people, selfless acts of kindness, and that's telling me that hope is still alive. And I'm a hope builder, doctor. I want to build some hope out there to the people watching the show.
Well, I would say, um, from my perspective, it's that, you know, we all move forward. We all keep moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what. Some of us are a little faster than others, but we all move forward,
Mm-hmm.
and we all end up, in what I would call the light, or with God, or in a good place.
Well, I tell people talk about moving forward. I say don't be like Lot's wife, because Lot's wife looked around at Sodom and she got turned into a pillar of salt. So there's a good lesson. And that's the thing about the dead too. I mentioned earlier in the first hour. The dead need to stay dead. Stay out of the world of the living. It's not their time's over. They don't get no more. And I'm killing them again, Pamela. I mean, I'm not a violent person, but there's somebody from the dead's haunting me. So stay back there. You stay dead. And then people don't spend your time looking in the past, but look forward and with
Well,
hope. You got to look forward with
it
hope.
it varies. Are they helpful or are they not helpful? I mean, I know of a grandmother who had passed to the other side who would babysit. She would babysit her little kid for her daughter and son-in-law. So I mean,
Okay, so
are they helpful? Are they not? Is this something that's benefiting people, or is it holding them back?
let me jump out of the picture here, because we're going back to your first stages here, and this is what this is. And I'm just giving you a platform to speak your views. I'm not saying I agree with everything, but certainly your views are valid, and we need to hear them. So, but there is another view out there, because I was doing some pre research for the show about what happens after you die, and then there's something out there called the 1 minute after a believer dies, and that popped up several places on the internet. I was looking to see what happens, because you had, and I didn't see the time frame of what yours
That
were.
would be well, first you'd be recognizing you're dead, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise you wouldn't see the
Well, I
angels
hope you.
who are
Yeah,
going to
I think
usher
somebody
you.
would know but if they're talking, but how could they recognize?
No, they don't always figure it out. The problem is they often describe feeling so alive that they can't. It's like that Bruce Willis movie, The Sixth Sense.
Yeah.
They're only
Well.
seeing what they want to see, what they expect to see. It takes them a while sometimes to realize they're
Mhm,
dead. I'm
mhm,
probably the only person who wasn't surprised by that movie. I was watching that movie, and just after he was shot, I was like, I bet he's dead.
mhm,
And I'm watching the whole movie the first time, and I'm thinking, I'm betting he's dead. He's just not
mhm,
seeing what's really going on. So
mhm,
at the end, I was like, yes, see, I knew it. He
mhm.
just never saw it.
Well,
So,
then,
in terms of the angels, you have to recognize you're dead first and separate from your body. So the angels would be meeting spirit helpers. Moving through levels, it can be instantaneous, just about going. And if you're straight at the light, to me, that's God's presence, that
mhm.
that energy.
Well, if
Um,
but wait a minute,
yeah. Yep.
if you're dead, you say you got to realize you're dead.
Yes.
But if you're realizing, then you're not dead, are you? You can't be realizing if you're
No, no,
dead.
you can realize you're dead. You can be looking down at your body and going, holy cow, that was me. What happened?
Hmm.
And you look and the spirits are going, you've died. It's time to go with us.
Hmm.
And we're going
Hmm.
to help you meet, or there might be
Hmm.
people to meet
Hmm.
you that,
Mm.
that you want to see, family relatives, for example.
By the
Your
by
mom
the
might visit.
by the way, this 1 minute looks like that's for people that know Christ there. So I'm just pointing that out. So somebody think, hey,
Right, right.
I got a free ride here. All right, let's
And
get
feel they deserve to be in God's presence. You've
well.
got that self-belief too. So
Well,
um,
I'm all about love over here. Hey, got more questions. Let me try to rip through them real
sure.
quick here. What's the difference between remote viewing and psychic abilities? Are they the same thing?
Ooh, that's a good question, actually, because I've studied controlled remote viewing with Lynn Buchanan, who is one of the guys who um, was part of that original Stargate project for the CIA. Um, it's really interesting. Remote viewing is you're sort of you're creating, your unconscious mind is creating almost a duplicate of whatever the target is. And most psychics find it incredibly frustrating because the way you're doing it, you're separating it. You learn to separate out different types of descriptors by what's most apt to be garbage and what's most apt to be legit. Okay. And you're going through different levels, and there's a moment when you have an emotional connection to the target. You look like you've done some CRV, and then you get a little more connected and you start getting more details. But I can have 100% hit rate on my final summary of what I got with remote viewing, which is this technique created by Ingo Swann and used in the Stargate project. And I won't have a clue what I was looking at. And every single thing I say is accurate. And I have no idea. So I think of it as going from the details towards what it is. With psychic, you tend to start with what it is, and then you work towards the details. So it's a different way of getting information. What's interesting is a lot of people who do remote viewing for a long period of time develop more psychic abilities, maybe because your unconscious is like, screw this. We're going to do the shortcut. We're just going to go straight to the target, and see it for what it is instead of, playing this game of getting there. But they do seem to be different. And there's certainly different approaches, and you get different levels of information. And there are times I will do both just because you get such different levels of details.
Wow, that's a great answer. All
It
right.
was a very good question.
Hey,
Yeah.
how about this question out of the live chat? And by the way, people got a few more minutes here. If you have a question for the good doctor, just put it in the live chat. Smoke C says, Doctor, is it possible to skip the afterlife or choose your next destination, so to speak?
Nope. I don't believe it is.
You're stuck? I mean, there's an order that you can't get out of?
Yeah, you can do it at different speeds. There are certain stages you can skip through. For example, you don't have to go to your funeral. You don't have to visit people who were alive. But they are not going to let you skip the judgment phase. Because that's where you learn. That's where you grow. That's when you become a better person. So that if you are someone who, is going to then go to the next stage is your spiritual work. So it might be, and it's self-chosen. Do I want to do something, that like act as a guide for somebody I care about, or act as a guide for somebody who's going through the same thing I went through? Because it's another way of learning. We all know that one of the best ways to learn is to teach. So it sort of reinforces whatever you've been learning.
I don't know. They say those that can't do teach. I don't know. Is it?
My parents were teachers.
No,
sometimes
that can't be true. The best thing you do is teach. If you can teach somebody to fish, they can feed themselves for a lifetime.
Yeah.
So I've got no problem with teaching. I don't like it. I don't like that line there. That euphemism. Who made that up? Sound like a Debbie Downer.
But I do think you can learn a lot by teaching others, because they'll ask questions that are very good and that you may not have thought of, and in helping explain it, then you learn too.
You talk about not getting out of your life review. I mean, we've showed a couple times that scripture of Hades, where you go if you don't know God, and then you go to this place, but it says later, then it says that you get that life review, and if you're in that place and then you get your life review, it's not going to be good no matter what you say, because the scales will be balanced, good deeds and bad deeds. And I got a feeling that it's like a brick boink on the bad deeds, kind of like in the Ten Commandments. All right.
Well, I will mention again, I mentioned it briefly before. Part of the reason you have guides to help you through the judgment phase is that some people do judge themselves too harshly. And they want you to see the good, not just the bad, because you've got to see a true balance. On the other hand, you get some psychopaths who want to say everything they did was good, and they aren't going to get away with it. They're not going to be allowed that.
There is a workaround. It says if you judge yourself, you won't be judged. What that basically is saying, it's kind of like you've been saying, really, and that is we've got to focus on living the best life we can, because we're only here for a nanosecond. We're just grass that withers in the daylight sun. It's best to try to stay focused on doing the good deeds so you don't end up having to get in that situation. All right, so here we go. Let's ask another question. Who are the spirit guides you speak of?
Well, they can be different levels of being, and you may not even have just a single spirit guide or group of spirit guides in your life. They can sort of come and go. You get some specialists. Like I say, sometimes their spiritual work is to sort of be a specialist in certain areas. So I've seen spirit guides come and go. A lot of times you will have relatives with you. Grandparents are extremely common to see around somebody. Extremely common. It doesn't mean they're there all the time, but they'll often be there just to sort of, surround you with love every once in a while when you need it, encouragement, that kind of stuff. So.
Okay. Alrighty. Teflon Co says, Doctor, when you dream, are you really spirit traveling?
Well, there are people who do spirit travel during dreaming, and there's also lucid dreamers who will use it as a way of getting accurate psychic information. But for me, when I'm dreaming, I'm usually just dreaming unless I specifically want to connect with a certain spirit. Every once in a while, you'll have shared dreams. Those are really interesting, where it appears you and other people will go somewhere in the astral. It's like what he's talking about. And you'll have these really weird details, and you'll wake up the next morning and go, whoa, that was some dream. And you call up a friend and they had the same dream, and they're pulling up the same details. So you're like, it varies.
Okay, so I had a very lucid dream the other day. Let's do some dream interpretation. So there's this tower. It looked like some sort of a radio tower or cell phone tower, and it reached all the way up to the stratosphere. And then it began to fall. And it fell across the land and smashed a bunch of stuff. But it landed next to a factory. And the factory had cars in it, and they were all sprayed with something. And I understood in my dream that was sprayed to protect them from nuclear radiation. And then I'm in the dream driving as fast as I can to get away from it. What meanest the dream thereof, Dr. Heath?
Well, one thing I would warn people who do want to interpret their own dreams is that there is a certain amount of very personal symbology involved. So the first thing I always ask someone is, what do they think it meant? Because that way they can tell me what their personal symbols are, and that will add to the meaning. You also have to separate out how much is just general fear, how much is recap of something you happen to see that day. Did you see a disaster movie?
Right.
So you're just like everything else when you're dealing with the paranormal, you're trying to separate out all the different factors. And generally speaking, when you figure out the right answer, you'll know it. I mean, there's this sense of rightness, in your heart.
What one of the biggest paranormal events ever recorded was where Jesus was crucified and killed, went into a tomb, dead, and came out alive 3 days later. Isn't that the definition of paranormal?
Well, you would have religious scholars argue that. And in fact, some of the most interesting writers, one of the most interesting writers is Herbert Thurston, who was a Catholic priest, very devout. And one of the things the Catholic Church was very concerned about was separating out true miracles from God from paranormal abilities of humans. And so they really some of the best books I've read were in the 50s and are incredibly well thought out in terms of looking at, is this of God? Is this of human? Or is this of God working through a human?
Okay.
And so they would go through that whole rigmarole. I would say, though, based on the fact that so many times you see paranormal things with the saints and others appear to be cultural, that they're certainly shaped by the person who's experiencing them, if it's not created by them instead of by God.
Okay, so you're not going to help me with my dream interpretation, but
I actually love dream interpretation, but I would start by saying, what do you think it means, and explore it from there.
Well, I would think it means that it was a cell tower, and I'm tired of getting one bar on my thing. And so I'm going to blow the world up with a nuclear bomb unless somebody gives me 4 bars, because I got 4 bars on my phone and I never get 4 bars.
Right. So, I think that doesn't feel right. Could it also be, though, since you have your own podcast, your own radio show, that you're trying to reach the heavens, you're trying to reach the world, and it's frustrating.
Say on. Maybe I'm about ready to hit the big time.
I don't know. But whenever I'm doing dream, I do a lot of dream interpretation for friends. So I would just say, one of the things I do is I always explore what the symbology means to them. And I also always accept feedback, because symbols can be very personal, and what those symbols would mean to me wouldn't be the same as to you.
Okay. Well, I'm in the mood to interpret somebody's dream. Freely Speaking says, when I was a boy, I slipped off a water. Wait a minute, this is not a dream. I thought it was a dream. Oh, well, when I was, I'm going to interpret it anyway. When I was a boy, I slipped off a waterfall and fell 30 feet onto the rocks below. I was unconscious and floating above my body. I said, I'm dead. Then I was back in my body. Did I really die?
No, I don't think he died. What he had was an out-of-body experience, which we can have in traumatic moments. And I think might be, I don't know for a fact, but they might be a little more common when it's when there's a question of, are you going to go back to your body or not? But I've done that. Something happens, you popping out of your body and you're seeing it, and back in, you're not dead.
What if you start popping out and say you got some bills to pay and you really don't want to pay them, so you're thinking, hey, I just go and check out now and I got to worry about them bills. I mean, can you?
Well, your body is still there. It's just your consciousness is separating from your body.
Yeah.
They've done some interesting studies that show we seem to have thoughts before the brain reflects those thoughts. So the question is, are you having consciousness is outside the body sort of to begin with, and then reflecting down into the body, the thoughts and the stuff? And you think it's all connected, but sometimes they get separated. I don't know.
Well, we have this graphic from your website, the implications of non-locality. Aren't you talking about non-locality?
Non-locality is a little different than that. Non-locality is saying everywhere is here. So you can act anywhere on anything, anywhere. It's a little different than what we're talking about here.
Well, I tried some of that non-locality on somebody. I said, I am you, you are me, and I should have access to your bank account. And again, I struck out. I just keep getting it wrong, doctor. And that's why I wanted to have you on the show. See if you could kind of enlighten me a little bit.
Well, materialism doesn't tend to get you as far, because if you were them and they are you, then you wouldn't necessarily, you might want to share, you might not want to share.
Well, then the guy started singing, I can't go for that. I can't go for that. So that didn't work. But I agree with you, though, about consciousness or even a dream. It seems to me those aren't local. I just can't explain it. It doesn't seem like it's manufactured, because something has to put those pieces in a coherent film, into a movie. Something's got to assemble those parts. And I don't, nobody's ever really explained, no scientist has ever explained that. One of the great consciousness is a great mystery. That kind of goes with the afterlife. It's a great mystery. People have been searching the afterlife and wondering for thousands of years since some people came out of a cave, they came out with a club. I didn't come from that group. I came from a better group. But some of the people they come for these 8 people, and they didn't have any sense anyway. So I don't know if they was looking for the afterlife or not. They were looking for a banana or something. So, hey, we're getting near the end of the broadcast. Doctor, by the way, welcome Vivinka Amato, Robert Birdsall, and Nine Lives All to the show. Tell us about your website. What can people find there?
Oh, well, my website is my name, PamelaHeath.com, and it has no advertising. It does not track people. I don't, if it collects data, I don't know about it. And I'm the webmaster, so I ought to know about it.
Wait a minute. Wait. Do you use cookies?
I think everything has cookies, but it doesn't collect or save them. Okay. I don't get them.
I just don't.
Basically, what I wanted to do was give people a source of information that's more trustworthy than Wikipedia, which is just a disaster, in terms of inaccuracy. And try to answer some common questions. In fact, if I get enough questions from people by email, I'll add it to my FAQ pages. I have speeches, slideshows, videos, stuff you can download. Everything there is free. And everything is without advertisements.
Well, I'm glad you came to that. I came to that myself. For a while, I did like everybody else of YouTube. You hit the monetization, and I thought, you know what? I can't stand it when I go somewhere and somebody, because really, if you have a life-saving piece of information, do you really want to make somebody watch a commercial to give it to them? I mean, these paywalls is just out of hand. People put them everywhere. Yeah. Read three words, and you got a paywall. It's like, you really don't want to help me. You want me to finance. So I took it off. I just stopped monetizing a couple of years ago. I just won't do it. So there's nothing on my side either. So there you go.
Yeah, it just these are common answers that I hope help people that are struggling with questions I heard other people struggling with, especially. It's very frustrating that so few people have actually read the research, because we have formal experimental research since the 1880s. And there's actually an online parapsychology library that anyone can subscribe to and read all the journal data, text searchable, that they want. So there are links on my website to that library. But the main thing is, don't believe it. When people tell you there are no answers for this stuff and science hasn't looked at it, they're wrong. They just haven't bothered to read the research.
Okay. All right. Well, Dr. Pamela Heath, I appreciate you talking about the Handbook to the Afterlife. Well, 2022 is coming up. So you got any big plans? What's your New Year's resolution?
I don't make New Year's resolutions. I'm just hoping that it's a better year for all of us, because last year was pretty awful for most people.
My New Year's resolution is not to make one. And I think that's one I can actually keep.
Good for you.
All right, Doctor.
Yeah, I gave up on them years ago.
Okay. Hey, I appreciate you coming on the show.